Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, back on here after a few days. I haven't been on here for, personal reasons and stuff like that, just getting situated. Obviously, the background looks a little different, but I'm back on here now, probably for a couple more episodes. So now that I'm back here, it's been a while since we talked anything about the NFL, and a lot has happened, so we're going to get into it on today's show, talking about the Combine. Obviously, I think is the biggest piece of news this week, starting up today with a few of the position groups and then going through it the rest of the week. We're going to get into that. Also, the Matthew Stafford situation, looking at what has been developing there, the latest news on it. Matthew Stafford being allowed to speak to other teams. Where are we going to go from there? That stuff and more coming up on today's show. So make sure to stick around to the very end to get a taste of other topics that we're going to talk about on today's show. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make on today's show, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and feedback is always a big part of the show. Any reactions or anything like that is always very well received. So if you have any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, please, again, don't hesitate to do so. If you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the Super Chat feature. You can use the Super Chat feature by clicking on the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a great way to support our show, and we're always very thankful and grateful to you guys for doing that. So go ahead and do that. Let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and let us know what's on your mind. Get involved with the conversation. We had a lot to talk about on today's show. So going into the first segment, talking about the Combine, as I said, I think the biggest piece of news this week, obviously, I think the starting point or first stop on the new season, the off season getting underway, and this is the first major stop on this journey that we go through each and every year with the NFL. And I thought it would be a good idea to just come on here and talk about the storylines heading into this Combine, because I think it's a very interesting one, very different from last year, right? Where last year we had very clear names as to who we thought was going to go at the top of it. Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May also involved in there. Very quarterback-heavy class, right? And now this year we got it pretty differently, right? You have a couple quarterbacks, but the quarterback class isn't considered as strong as it was a year ago, and it's very heavily lenient on the defensive side of the ball this time around. And not only that, but we've already gotten some news as to, some updates on who's participating, who's not participating, and stuff like that. So with all of that kind of bundled up into something, I have 5 storylines that I thought are the most interesting going into this week. And with that, the Combine's going to go on until March the 3rd. So we got a good amount of days here to really have a solid idea of what this is all going to be like. So for today, starting off with number 5, the fifth, I guess, most intriguing storyline I'll be paying attention to with the Combine is with the running backs, right? And we got the news that Ashton Jeanty will not be participating. He's going to be saving that for his pro day, as some of the bigger names usually do. So Ashton Jeanty's not going to be participating, and I think he's a pretty safe number 1, obviously, right, in the running back class. So with that being the case, how does this open up the door for all the other running backs, right? Who's going to stand out as the number 2 guy in this class? Because I think apart from the defenders, right, the whole defensive class being very deep, I think the running backs this year have a very diverse and also a very deep class to get into, right? I could name a bunch of guys right off, just right off the rip right now as some of the higher named guys, some of the higher touted guys, right? You have your Omarion Hamptons, your Quinshon Judkins, your Travion Hendersons, though Caleb Johnson obviously is another one, but then you have other guys like Taj Brooks, Cam Scadaboo. What is he going to be like in this Combine process? How much can these guys really get their their draft stock to rise essentially, right? And with Ashton not participating, all the attention shifts over now to the other guys. And you might think it is like a Caleb Johnson who takes that opportunity and just runs with it, right? Marion Hampton is another one that has been considered a top 2, top 3 running back in this class. I haven't heard too much about him, I guess, compared to some of the other guys, but he's also a guy that I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at. And Cam Scatterbo, I mentioned, is another one who dominated in the playoff game, obviously against Texas. They got eliminated, right? But he had a very solid performance. So, just the running back class overall, who's going to take the opportunity to stand out and have their stock rise? I don't know if it means that they're going to be drafted, in the first round, along with Ashton Genty, but they could certainly help their case out a lot with all the tests and the drills on the field, obviously. So that's one thing I'll be looking at. And the other one goes no further than the quarterback position, right? Staying in the backfield, if you will. The quarterback participation is something I'll be very interested in, with us getting more news on Shedeur Sanders also not participating in the combine. He is saving all of his measurements and tests and stuff like that for his pro day at Colorado. So how does that open up the door for other guys, right? Your Quinn Ewers, your Jackson Darts, Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, all those guys that are projected, to be the second tier of quarterbacks. How does their stock change, if at all, right? I mean, they have the opportunity. It doesn't mean they're necessarily going to jump to the right behind Shedeur Sanders or something like that, right? But they have the opportunity at least. Or maybe like a guy like Cam Ward, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the guys, trying to catch up to Cam and Shedeur Sanders. It could be Cam Ward distancing himself even further from Shedeur Sanders, in a lot of people's minds, as the clear-cut best quarterback in this draft. I don't like guys kind of skipping out, especially in this class where there's a lot of questions and doubts about Shedeur, maybe about Cam, and how people say it's not as strong. I think when, you have those narratives, I guess, out there, of course the players aren't going to necessarily buy into them or believe them, right? They just ignore them. But I feel like in this situation, I thought it would have been better for Shedeur to participate and really stake his claim as the best quarterback, and he might still do that with a phenomenal, pro day workout, but I felt like this could have been a good opportunity to do so, and I feel like now for Cam, obviously, has an opportunity to maybe participate. Maybe he decides not to, but I'm going to go with the fact that I think he could separate himself even more. So all of that, all those storylines, and then how does that affect the projection of these players later on after the combine will be interesting to look at as well. Then at number 3, arguably the most unusual, once-in-a-generation unique player, Travis Hunter, is my number 3. He plans to attend the combine as a defensive back. So, doing all those drills, participating in everything like that, how well does he test? How well does he compare to other guys, right? You think of a Will Johnson, who was the pound-for-pound best corner in this class, going into the year, and I think that kind of switched throughout the duration of this year, right? Obviously, Will Johnson dealing with some injuries as well, so I think that has something to do with it. How does this combine affect that? And also, not just defensive back as a position for him, right? Because he plays both sides. Does he take part in some wide receiver drills? Is that something that he's open to? Or maybe he feels like that's too much to do at the combine? All these things that play a part in it are going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And Travis Hunter, arguably the one player that doesn't have to show as much as any other player in this draft class, right? Because he is so unique and so special, right? That it feels like if there was any player that didn't need to participate in the combine, it would be him. But because the opinions and the thoughts on him playing both sides are so polarizing, in a way it almost feels like he's got the most to prove, right? Which is kind of backwards because he does so much already. He plays two sides of the ball, but it still feels like he has the most to prove, if that makes sense. So I'm very intrigued by that, to see what his participation is like as a defensive back, but also how the interviews go, right? Because they're going to be asking him about, are you going to be wanting to play both sides? How involved do you want to be? Is that going to be a deal breaker with some of the teams? All that sort of stuff is going to be something to watch when the combine, gets to that position. So that was number 3. At number 2, I have just the number one overall pick, because, I talked about Cam Ward and how he could elevate his spot. Shedeur Sanders not being there, obviously. Travis Hunter, I just finished talking about him. But also, Abdul Carter, when I was planning for this segment, I thought this could have been a great opportunity for him, to stake his claim. I'm going to be using that a lot. But, I feel like the Combine gets undervalued a lot of times for a couple of reasons, but I feel like it is just always a great opportunity for you to put yourself out there and help your stock out, if anything, right, if you put the work in. But, Abdul Carter, I saw that he isn't going to be participating because of that shoulder injury, but, in a world where he was participating, it could have been an opportunity for him to make his claim for the number one pick, right? And then how does that picture change, right? If he blows everybody out of the water, how does that affect the Titans? Are they going to want to stay there or maybe move out of it? Cam Ward, the same thing. If he performs phenomenally at the Combine, how does that affect everything else? Does that maybe, if you're talking about trades or something like that, does it make a team like the Jets or a team like the Raiders or something like that, who are way far behind, right, in the draft and are probably not going to get Cam Ward, just staying pat, seeing him perform like this, does it make them more proactive in trying to get a trade done, right? They see him, they see all of his intangibles and measurements and how he performs at the Combine. Does that give them more of an incentive to try and trade up, right? All those things, I think, play into it. And how the number one pick is altered in a draft class where it's so wide open, it feels like, right? You don't have a guy like a quarterback right at that spot. I thought that could have been a spot where, with the Combine and how it all turned out, it could have been altered a good amount, but Abdul's not participating. Hopefully Cam does. To see him participate this early would be something cool to see, I think. So number one pick and how it's altered was on this list as well. And then just number one for me, very interested in the defensive class, right? Because, you kind of get tired, or at least I do, a little bit of the quarterbacks kind of dominating each and every draft class, it seems. So this defensive class, it feels like it's very dominated by the defensive line. There's some great defensive backs out there as well. And, of course, just every level of the defense feels like it's very strong this year. And just some of these guys that are coming into this Combine, I'm sure most of these guys are going to be participating. Other than Abdul Carter, from what I've seen, it goes beyond the first round too, right? Not just your household names like a Mason Graham or a Jalen Walker, some of these guys, right? Will Johnson, these guys that are being projected to go into the first round. You got guys way beyond that in the second, third rounds that people have as potential hidden gems out there, right? And if they perform and blow everybody out of the water, maybe they sneak into the second round or the early half of that second round, right? Maybe even the back end of the first round if they really do a number out there, right? You just never know. It just starts to build up that hype. Everybody starts to give these crazy takes, right? But I think it helps their stocks a lot, especially with the defensive line. It feels like it's one of the deepest ones in recent history. At least that's what everybody's been saying, from what I've been watching and stuff like that. So very interested to see how that all plays out, who helps their stock the most and who goes out there and really takes advantage of this opportunity. It's all going to be on display this week. So that is coming up throughout the duration of this week. Beyond these 5 storylines, there's a lot more to get into, right, obviously, but those are just some of the ones I thought would be most intriguing here to start off the week. But going on with this show, we're going to go into a quick break right now, but when we return, we're going to talk about the Matthew Stafford situation, what's going on with him, the idea of his agent being given the permission to speak with other teams. How does that affect, this whole situation? And just, where do we go from here with Matthew Stafford and the Rams, right? That topic, my thoughts and everything like that is coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I
wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, we are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about this whole Matthew Stafford situation and where it stands up right now, because obviously, you know, we haven't been here for a couple of days, so a lot has transpired, I think. I think last we talked about this situation. I'm pretty sure the Rams, from what I remember and what we discussed, they wanted to know where Stafford stood on potentially playing at all this season and whether or not he was thinking about retiring. They wanted an answer sooner, or quicker, I should say, than what they got last year. And they got that, you know, it was pretty early on in the process where we knew that Stafford was going to play. You know, that wasn't a question, but now it just all had to do with the Rams and how they could accommodate the contract and potentially keeping Stafford, or, you know, worst case scenario, in my opinion, would be a world where he does end up moving on and he becomes the quarterback, the starting quarterback of another team, right? That's what I think the worst case scenario would be, in my opinion. But, you know, we are talking about a 37-year-old Matthew Stafford, and with his contract, you know, I think being probably the most important part of this whole situation. Really, the deal with his contract is that he has $4 million guaranteed on it, and right, when you're more of a veteran player, right, a 37-year-old quarterback, you know, $4 million for playing this sport is obviously not going to cut it. So I'm sure the negotiations are going to go along that path of discussing that. How do they accommodate Matthew Stafford with some more guarantees, you know, for the huge asset he is, obviously, to their team. He deserves more. He should be getting more. And also the fact that he is due to make $27 million in 2025. You know, for the quarterbacks that are making more than that, the amount of quarterbacks that are making more of that, all of them are not better than Matthew Stafford, right? So I'm sure he's looking at that and thinking that for how much he's helped out this team, really building it to what it is right now, him along with Sean McVay in the front office, and, you know, he's played a huge part in it, right? They traded for him, and the year that he came in, you know, they won the Super Bowl. So I'm sure he is feeling that he is deserving of more of a, you know, just a better compensation, right? Obviously, he's deserved that, and I don't think he's wrong for thinking that, and I don't think it's wrong for him to kind of play hardball in that aspect, right? So that's kind of, I think, where this whole situation kind of lies right now, right? Just that this weird gray area where both sides are trying to figure out a middle ground where everybody's happy. And in that process, right, we got the latest, you know, major development on Saturday where the NFL Network's Tom Pelissero reported that the Rams had given permission to Matthew Stafford's agent to speak with other teams during this process, right? The idea behind that is to kind of gauge a value of where Matthew Stafford lies right now in the market, right? To see what it would take to renegotiate with him, what the market price seems to be for him, you know, having his agent go out there, speak with different teams, and come back, I guess, with a median sort of average, or just an average, right, of what it would take to re-sign him, right? See what other teams are willing to pay for him, come back, and then see what, you know, that number is. And if you can accommodate that, I'm sure the Rams would be happy to do that. If not, you know, there are some hesitations from the Rams, you know, that investing maybe too much in a 37-year-old quarterback is not something that they're particularly eager to do, right? And it is all speculation right now. It is all inclinations for that part of it. But, you know, you kind of see it in a way where, you know, I'm trying to read both sides, right? And the Rams, you know, let's say they pay Matthew Stafford like like, is it crazy to say that they're going to pay him 50? Like, that's the number I've seen a couple times. And I don't know, because like 50 million, you see me how I'm talking right now, right? I'm having some hesitations and second thoughts about paying Matthew Stafford $50 million. And I'm not saying he's sitting there with his arms crossed, not willing to negotiate anything other than 50 million, right? I'm sure he's open to whatever, right? To see what best accommodates him and his family, obviously, and the team, right? But I don't know. It feels like he is going to get a pay raise wherever he ends up, right? I think that's going to be fair for him. But the numbers that are being thrown out there, kind of meeting that market price, depending on what other teams are willing to pay for him, is a bit tricky for me, right? Is he worth 50 million? If you look at the other quarterbacks making that money, I would say yes, right? Because you look at guys like Tua, Trevor, Dak, nobody's going to admit it, but if those teams had the opportunity to trade their quarterbacks for Matthew Stafford, they would probably do so. So when you compare him to other players making 50 million, you should say, of course, Matthew Stafford should be making that much money. But I think the context of the team and how it is built up right now, that's obviously a huge thing. Because if you're looking at the Rams, right, and I know the cap space is going up a bunch, right? It just jumped up to, I forget what it was this year, but it grew a lot more this year compared to last year where it also jumped, but this year jumped up even more. So I acknowledge that aspect of it, right? But also with the Rams, right, they're in a good spot right now, I feel like, where they've hit on a lot of their young players. They got a good, solid, young core of players that really made a huge impact last season, right? You saw how close they came to beating the Eagles. But they want to continue to build on that, right, obviously, and they don't have endless amounts of money, right? So you got to balance that, your young core, who obviously you're going to have to pay eventually, and trying to also get better, right? Because you want to get better and get over the hump and eventually beat the Eagles, right? Because you were the closest team to doing so. You want to get over that hump and not only get better, but you got to manage trying to pay Matthew, right? They're already moving on from Cooper Kupp because they probably realized that it wasn't going to fit with what they wanted to do. So I'm sure they want to bring in other guys to help them shore up that run defense, right? Because it was pretty bad against the Rams, right? So they want to do that as well as trying to keep Stafford and give this one last go at it, I'm sure. But it is tricky when you're talking about Stafford and how much money he should be making and how much, you get an idea when the agent comes back and, you get a gauge of the market price and everything like that. But I'm sure, when this thing kind of develops even more, I'm sure once we get into the combine, right, we're probably by like Wednesday or Thursday, I'm sure we're going to hear some more things, right, when everybody gets together in Indianapolis. You got agents talking to agents, representatives from teams talking to agents and stuff like that. So we're going to get more information, I'm sure, throughout this week. But, if Matthew Stafford's out there, you're not going to have little teams, kind of knocking at your door. There's going to be a lot of teams interested. And from what I've seen, there was a report from Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer that reported that the Steelers, the Raiders, the Browns, and the Giants have shown some interest in Matthew Stafford, among others that were unnamed have as well. But you take the teams that are interested, and then you look at a big picture here a little bit with the quarterback market, right? And it's not the best year to be needing a quarterback, right? Because, you got Matthew Stafford, potentially, if he's available, probably being at the top of that list. But Sam Darnold, he had a great year, but the way it ended, people probably feel some sort of way about that. There are some doubts there. And, you have Aaron Rodgers, historically fantastic, tremendous talent sort of player, right? But recently it hasn't gone so well. The injuries and the performances, you got some doubts there as well. And then it kind of drops off when you're talking about like Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, Derek Carr potentially out there. Not the best year where you need a quarterback. So with that being the case, if this becomes a legitimate thing, going forward, right? If the Rams really feel like, because they got to take this into account, right? Like, the money is obviously a huge portion of it. I have my doubts about it as well. But when you look out there, are you the question you got to ask yourself is, are you willing to part ways with Stafford for that money and really not have a very solid quarterback option afterwards, right? Because if you move on from him because, the money just doesn't add up, like, who's going to be your quarterback, right? Even if it's not Jimmy Garoppolo, are you going to find somebody out there that's better than Jimmy Garoppolo? Like, definitively? Probably not. So that's, I think, also another thing that makes this a difficult call, right? If I'm the Rams, I probably would cave a little bit. I mean, I don't think I'm going over 50. 50 would be really pushing it. And again, I'm not sure if Stafford is sitting there pounding the table for 50. I doubt it. But like 50 would be the capper. Like, I don't think I would really want to go to 50. But if there was no coming back, if my hand is on the red button and if I press it, we're signing Matthew Stafford. But if not, he leaves and goes out the door and I have to have a quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo or like Sam Darnold or something like that, I'm probably going to push the red button if it all comes down to it. That's just me. But, I mean, I'm not thinking and I'm not in there, obviously. So it is a tough decision to call. There's a lot of factors out there. And, I mean, the quarterback class this year, we just finished talking about it, isn't one that everyone's excited about either. So the options outside of Matthew Stafford, I think, probably will end up with this story just having the Rams extend him or just giving him what he wants, as I just kind of alluded to. But it is tricky, right? It's not just as simple as, he's here, he wants this, all right, let's just give it to him. The Rams are trying to think long term, and I think for people that are maybe thinking like, why is this taking so long? Why are they giving him time to, to even speak to other teams? I think it's just a little bit more complicated, right? But when you simplify it to just, all right, who's going to be your other quarterback, it gets a little bit easier. But, I mean, you never know. There's a lot of things that these organizations really think about, right? Nobody thought that Luka would get traded, right? But here we are with Luka on the Lakers, right? You just never know, right? Crazier things have clearly happened. So I wouldn't be surprised, but if I was a betting man, I would say he would stay on the Rams. I think it would be hard to move on from him for that major reason that the quarterbacks outside of him, like, you'd be taking a pretty big step backwards. So I think that's the simplest way to put it. But with that, we're going to move on to another quarterback here, Aaron Rodgers. What is his future looking like? He's not going to be on the Jets, so we don't have to really worry about that. But where could he fit in? What could be the level of interest in Aaron Rodgers? And, what factors did he kind of give out as to what he's looking for in a new team? We're going to reveal all of that when we return right after this.
Looking for your daily sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the show, previously finishing our talk about Matthew Stafford and now moving on to another quarterback, another ageless wonder, Aaron Rodgers, and what his situation is looking like now, right? Because unlike Matthew Stafford, we know that Aaron is not coming back to the Jets. That has already been hashed out between Aaron Glenn, their general manager, Aaron Rodgers, that it's probably best that they part ways. And since we last spoke, Aaron and the Jets, I'm pretty sure since we last spoke, the Jets were just getting in Aaron Glenn, and they were at this point where we were discussing that those two, the general manager and Aaron Glenn, were going to make the decision, right? It wasn't going to be up to Ambassador Johnson, right? It was going to be the two new guys walking in the door having that major responsibility of making a call like this, right? And much like Matthew Stafford and where we kind of ended up with him, right? The decision isn't as simple as just like, all right, well, Aaron didn't play great last year, right? The team overall and the whole situation with the Jets overall wasn't great, so we're probably going to move on from him, right? You have to look past that and think, all right, well, if we move on from Aaron, what are we going to do at quarterback, right? Because we're not going to find a guy probably that's definitively better than Aaron at this point in time, right? You get a young guy. I don't know how likely it is that he steps in right away and he looks like Jaden Daniels, right? You're probably not going to get that. And then in free agency or some of these other guys, is it going to be that much better than Aaron? I doubt it. So they decided to make this call, right? I think it was one that probably everybody expected. And now we're here, right? Now we're here focusing on Aaron Rodgers. And, you know, with this whole situation, Aaron, it looks like he is going to play one more year or maybe just a year or two more. That actually hasn't been definitively said yet. You know, there could be still a possibility that he retires. But for right now, it feels like he is going to play one more year. And it seems, you know, with the quarterback situation right now and where Aaron is also right now in his career, comparing him to all these other guys like Fields, Darnold, and, you know, Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins and guys like this, it feels like Aaron Rodgers, with his pedigree and resume and stuff like that, would be the first option without a doubt for a lot of these teams, right? But it feels like this year, it feels a little off with Aaron for a couple reasons that I'll list out. But before that, I wanted to get to this TMZ kind of interview that they did with Aaron. You guys know how TMZ is, right? It's not like a typical interview. It's just kind of like a very natural interaction, I guess. They just kind of walk up to you, it looks like. So, you know, we had one of those. Typically, you know, as TMZ does, they approached Aaron Rodgers after a training session, it looked like, and they basically asked him, you know, what he's looking for in a potential new team for him in 2025, to which Aaron Rodgers said that he wants a team that obviously wants you as their quarterback, right? That it seems like the most obvious answer, right? Like the team that you potentially could go to, they actually want you to be their quarterback, right? They want you as their number one option. They want to have you in there. It's not just kind of like all right, we'll take you, I guess, right? No, like they want to have you in there, kind of lead their team and, you know, be the face essentially of their franchise for at least this season, right? That's one thing that Aaron Rodgers stated, right? They got to want to have you there, right, in the first place. And then he also said that they got to be a good team. And obviously, you know, like I said, as TMZ usually goes, kind of how unserious and kind of sarcastic also Aaron Rodgers is a little bit. It feels like a joke, kind of just unserious answer, but I think there are some truths in there as well because, you know, I don't know how old I think he's close to 40. I could look it up real quick right now, but basically the overarching thought that I'm having is that this is probably his last shot at a Lombardi trophy, obviously, and he's not getting any younger. I mean, he is 41 years old. He's going to be 42 in December. So this is his last chance at it, right? So with that kind of unserious answer, you know, there are some truths to it, like I said, because it's not just like you're going to go to whatever team and just kind of play to play, right? Everybody plays for the love of playing football, right? That's what everybody says. But when you're like 40-something years old and you're getting hit like that, and maybe you're going to a team where the offensive line isn't great, no one's doing that. No one's going to go and do that. Like, why would Aaron do a thing like that, right? You'd probably rather retire, right, than go out there and get hit relentlessly and just go play for whatever team, right? It makes no sense for him to do that. So when he says he wants to play for a good team, right, people will take it as, maybe a lot of people won't take it very well. Like look at this guy. He just wants to just join a good team like that. Like, who does he think he is, right? He's a very polarizing player. But I think that's just a very honest answer from Aaron. And the fact that he did say something like that is interesting because, I mean, if you want to join a good team, unfortunately, like, all the good teams are already stocked up at quarterback, right? Like, no good team, like an actual good team, needs a quarterback right now, right? It's not really how it works, right? If you're a good team, a legitimate, good contending team, you're not going to need a quarterback, right? Because then you wouldn't be in that category. So when you're talking about good teams, it's interesting when he puts it like that because, like, who does that even include, right? Because you're looking at the teams that need a quarterback, right? And I mean, those teams are like the Steelers, the Giants, the Raiders. Are they good teams? I mean, I guess the Steelers are the best ones out of them, but the last couple years it's been one and dones, like the same story, pretty disappointing and underwhelming. Are you going to want to join that team, essentially? And, I mean, the Raiders and Giants are even worse. Like, they need a quarterback, but they're not good teams. And if you want to stretch it out to good teams, I mean, maybe, like, the Rams, if they move on from Matthew Stafford, but bringing in an older quarterback kind of seems weird and unlikely at that point. So when he mentions good teams, it's kind of hard to match that up with teams that need quarterbacks, right? If you want to join a good team, you can go join and probably be the number 2, but it feels like Aaron wants to play. So a good team to kind of meet all of those credentials as a good team, I don't know if he's going to find that, which makes it pretty interesting by saying something like that. But also, the most interesting part of that was the first thing he said about that they want to have you. And I think that as a first option, I don't believe that's going to be the case this offseason. Because obviously of the way last season kind of ended, you know, I mentioned his age, he's going to be 42 years old. And he is just, I think, the most polarizing guy, or definitely quarterback in the NFL. And I think he just rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And while the Jets had a lot to do with how the season went last year, so did Aaron, right? Like, he didn't play very good at all during the first couple games or the early portion of that season. And then maybe towards the end, people will say that all hope was lost. So the numbers looked a lot better, right? So he's a very polarizing guy. You know, people have their reservations about Aaron Rodgers and how they feel about him. But to me, it feels like he'll be most people's kind of fallback option. And how does he kind of react to that, right? Like, I'm interested in seeing that, right? Seeing how he wants to be wanted by another team, right? He wants another team to come in and say, you know, we want you as our quarterback. But even that, kind of aligning it with a good team, feels like it's not going to be the case this year, right? Because I feel like teams out there like the Giants or the Raiders are probably going to be going towards a quarterback in the draft, right? You look at the Giants having the number 3 pick, they're probably going to be looking as that as their main source of trying to bring in a quarterback. Or free agency, right? I think Sam Darnold's going to be one of the main ones off the board. Or I might even say like Daniel Jones would probably get signed before him, which is insane to think about. But I feel like where Rodgers is right now, and the fact that he said a team wants to have him, I think at minimum, I think 1 or 2 of these guys is going to get signed before anybody goes to Aaron Rodgers. And then if Matthew Stafford becomes available, I think he'll definitely go before Aaron. So the idea, and again, it felt like a kind of an unserious answer, but it is interesting because when you think about it, saying something like that and looking at the landscape of everything right now, even like Justin Fields would probably get signed, I think, before Aaron. It feels like when he's saying that he wants to be wanted by a team, it might not be the case. So how does that affect everything? You know, probably being a team's fallback option. And I don't know, it feels like a very weird spot to be in, with Aaron just kind of sitting there and maybe waiting for a team to call, but nobody calls until, you know, all the guys are off the board, and now his phone starts to ring, right? How does he receive that at some point in the offseason? It's a very interesting spot. And then also, if he does get signed, again, I don't think he's going to be signed really to a good team. So how does that change the outlook of any team, right? Are the Steelers going to sign Aaron, basically, and are they going to be elevated to this status where they haven't been to before? Probably not. So it would feel like, I don't know, like it's definitely more of a benefit for him to be in a good team rather than the team, whoever's signing him, would benefit from bringing him in. That's just how I kind of look at the situation. But yeah, I mean, it's a very definitely a very noteworthy situation to follow, because I feel like some people will forget about Aaron Rodgers, being on the market and available, but I just think that's going to be the nature of this offseason, where the quarterback market overall is just a weird spot this year, where with a lot of doubts around some of these guys that are available, and also the quarterback class doesn't really help out too much. Teams need quarterbacks, so no one's going to want to make the first move, and I don't think Aaron is going to be the first move necessarily for a lot of teams. So it could be a while before this kind of gets settled. But, the fact that he kind of laid those two factors out there was something that made me kind of think about it. Like, you know what? He says he wants to be on a good team. I don't know if that's going to be the case. And also, for a team to want him to be like their number one option, again, I don't think that's going to be the case this year. So how does he react to that, and how does that affect it is going to be something to monitor as the offseason goes on. But for now, we're going to move on to some more rumors, some more speculation, this time around Deebo Samuel. There's been a report coming in, I think last week, that cleared up some of the things. There does seem to be a good amount of interest coming in for Deebo Samuel, so we're going to look at that. And similarly to Aaron Rodgers and Stafford, go through the fits, Deebo Samuel's value at this point in his career, coming off of a down year. We're going to touch on all of that right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you guys for joining me back on here on the program, and more speculation, more news roundup on the trades, potential movement around the NFL for some of their biggest stars. Along with Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, we know is going to be in a new spot in 2025, because back during the 49ers exit meetings, Deebo said that he requested a trade. He communicated it to Kyle Shanahan and the team. They obliged, and now this offseason, at some point, we're going to see Deebo in, the trade news notifications, and where he ends up and how we get there are obviously the biggest questions, right? But right now it appears that we are starting to get the first initial wave of interest coming in for Deebo, right? Because ESPN's Jeremy Fowler said last week that he said, "I just checked in on this. I was told that several teams have expressed interest, so at least preliminary talks on a potential trade have happened between Samuel, his agent, and the team." That's what Jeremy Fowler said last week on NFL Live. And so with that out there now, obviously, we look at this situation and what it means for Deebo, what it means for the 49ers, and I didn't think that Deebo would be requesting a trade. I thought that they were going to try and work it out somehow. I just never thought that the 49ers would say that they are wanting to trade Deebo, because they've been pretty reluctant about, saying that we're just going to trade this guy, right? I feel like with Brandon Ayuk, they were very stubborn on keeping him and re-signing him. Even during the darkest of days, they were adamant that they were going to get it done. So I just felt like Deebo, being one of their guys, right, I felt like they were never actually going to go out there and say, you know what, we're looking to trade Deebo, right? But it was actually Deebo who went up to them. So I guess I was right in that sense. But now that we are here, it feels like a situation. I feel like he's going to get traded, but also the 49ers have the opportunity and the option to release him, because it feels like at this point, we are at a point, like, we're not coming back. At least I don't think so. Like, if Deebo wants to leave, and it looks like he does, right, it just looks like I'm pretty sure he has said on his podcast that he just wants a new start, just a new environment and things like that. So it feels like there's no coming back from this at this point. So I do expect him to be traded, but in any case that he's not, the 49ers could also release him if if they wanted to do that, which he'd likely be a post-June 1st designation, so San Francisco could try to avoid a $31.5 million dead money hit on them for 2025 if they do that. But again, I feel like he is going to get traded, and I mean, if we're talking about June 1st as, one of the crucial dates for this sort of thing to happen, I probably anticipate, maybe before the draft that this situation kind of gets handled for the 49ers and Debo. It's not going to be something that drags out. I don't anticipate like the Brandon Ayuk situation, because that whole thing was very strange. There was contradicting rumors coming from all parts, especially then around the draft. And I think the 49ers and I think everybody was just at a point where they just wanted to move on from that, and there's no way they want to go through that again, obviously. So I feel like definitely before the draft, we're going to get a good sense of where we stand on Debo and, his status going forward and just his future. But, when we're talking about Debo and we're starting to look at what the future would hold for him personally, not for the team, but also kind of in relation to that is, a 29-year-old Deebo Samuel coming off of a down year in 2024, also on the last year of his contract, that is, those three things are the main sort of talking points and factors in this whole situation when we're talking about a trade and the value of a trade and stuff like that. Because based on what we've seen this past year and based on what some speculation and estimations are out there, it looks like a trade value for a third round, fourth round pick seems to be the starting point for Deebo Samuel right now, or really just the main endpoint for him right now. It feels like they're not going to get higher than a third round pick based on what we've seen just coming off of last year. And the biggest thing for me is that if I was a potential suitor for Deebo, how convinced would I be about what kind of Deebo Samuel I'm getting, right? Like, at this point, like I said, the age 29 on the last year of his contract and coming off of a down year, I have my reservations about thinking like, all right, well, I've seen Deebo's peak level, right? I've seen it already, right? It happened a couple years ago, 2022, I'm almost certain. I've seen that peak performance, so he could be capable of reaching that again, but he is also coming off of some pretty down years, not just 2024, but even the year before that was all right by Deebo's standards. So, if I'm a potential shooter out there, I'm thinking, like, this is a pretty household name, I would say, right? Like Deebo Samuel, you're thinking like versatile, great weapon, great wide receiver, kind of a do-it-all guy that could be very valuable to you in the type of system that you want to run, right? But, you got to balance it and kind of project forward, right? You have your reservations about thinking, all right, well, what's he going to give me this year, right? If last year was this way, how do I know that it's going to get any better, especially in a new scenario, new environment, new quarterback? There's a lot of things that would alter that. So what would make me want to go out there and think that, all right, I'm going to go and trade a third-round pick for Deebo? Why do that, right, when you're also, going to maybe have to pay him eventually, right? Do you want to do that to then a 30-year-old wide receiver who, again, you don't really know what the future kind of looks like for him? So I think that's one side of it, right? But then the other side, you're thinking of a guy that still could turn it around, has the potential, I still believe, to reach that peak level that he did with the 49ers if he just gets all this stuff straightened out, and maybe a new beginning could kind of invigorate him a little bit more and rejuvenate him, and he has a great year. I mean, who knows? And I think it's also to his best interest to do that, right? I think maybe with the 49ers, it just was kind of weighing on him, like, this year and how it fell short of expectations for the 49ers and the year before, falling short of the Super Bowl. I think all of that, could have just been weighing him down, and being in a new situation, I think for his best interest would benefit him the most if he goes out there, just goes crazy in the summer, hits all the workouts, and just comes back looking very much in shape, because that's also something else that people have a question about Deebo's physique and, him staying healthy and stuff like that is all things that people are wondering about, right, that they have their doubts about. So if he goes out there, goes crazy in the summer, comes in prepared, rejuvenated for a new team, again, it would be in his best interest to do so, because then afterwards you put yourself in a good spot potentially to get that extension and maybe earn yourself a bit more money than you would have this offseason, right? Because you're coming off of a down year. Now this year you go out there, prove everyone wrong, you're a huge asset to a new team, and you maybe stay with them next season, or you're just on a one-year type of deal sort of thing with them this season, and next year you move on. That could be something that ends up happening with Deebo. And I think if he goes out there and performs well, then next offseason it looks a lot different for him, right? So I think for both parties, whoever does end up signing him, as the other portion of this story, this narrative, I guess, with Deebo, is that he goes out there, has something to prove, and a team also goes out there knowing that, they could help each other in this regard. Almost like Stephon Diggs, I guess, was supposed to do this year until, unfortunately, he got hurt, right? I thought that was a situation where it looked like it was going great. It looked like Stephon and the Texans were going to have a great year, but obviously the injuries piled up, and now, we don't know what's going to happen with Stephon Diggs, but that could have been a situation where he balled out, and then in the offseason, maybe he stays with Houston or somebody else is willing to offer him more money based on what they saw the year before that, right? If that makes sense. So I think that's where kind of Deebo stands right now. And it's really all just up to him, I guess you would say, right? He wanted to be traded. He put himself in this position. So with that being the case, I think for him, he has to go out there and really look like the Deebo that he was a year or two ago, right? I think he just has to do that, because I think this could be a great opportunity, a great pivot point for him where he has all these doubts about him. He goes and proves himself, and then just in an instant after one season, he could go out there and help a team, maybe like the Commanders, or maybe like a team like the Texans potentially, or the Buffalo Bills, or maybe the Jaguars. Doesn't necessarily have to be making it to the playoffs or anything like that, or to like a conference championship, but helping the Jaguars turn things around down there, right? The Jets maybe potentially there, alongside Garrett Wilson. I think they're going to move on from Devontae Adams anyway. But there's other teams, right? Like the Panthers, I'm sure would love a wide receiver. The Saints as well. Teams like that. I feel like if he goes out there, makes a mark on this team, and really, I guess for the Commanders, the Texans, and the Bills, if he goes out there and really plays a part in helping them get over the hump and really making a difference, it would be such a huge thing for him, would benefit him, and also benefit the team that is trading a third-round pick for him as well. So I think really, other than everything else, this is a great spot to be in, and it's all on Deebo's hands essentially, right? Because like I said, he put himself in this position. He has it all right out in front of him, right? And I know you can't predict injuries and things like that, and things can go wrong, obviously. But the biggest question with this all being on his hands is, can he find the best version of himself? And I think he is talented enough to do so. We're just going to have to wait and see how, I guess, serious he is about this, right? Because it feels like he's very adamant about, I've heard him talk in his podcast on how, like, the Super Bowl losses have, obviously have really affected him and stuff like that. So it looks like he wants to have, like, that kind of moment, that playoff moment, and get back to a Super Bowl and actually really win it. Now he just has to show it, essentially, right? And if he does end up on a team like the Commanders, like the Bills, like the Texans, who have an opportunity to do so, you can't just throw that to waste, right? So whenever this trade does end up happening, like I think it will, you got to stay healthy, you got to bounce back, and I do believe Deebo is capable of showing us that Deebo from 2021, 2022. I think that's still in there, but he just got to show it. So it is all up in his hands. We'll see where he ends up, and it's going to be a crazy offseason, I think. Like, there's going to be a good amount of trades. Stafford maybe, Rodgers, obviously, Deebo, Cooper Kupp, Myles Garrett. I think he's going to get traded. It's going to be a pretty wild offseason. Plus, there's more money being thrown at these teams. It's going to be interesting, and Deebo's definitely going to be a big part of it. So with that in mind now, we're going to get to our last segment here before we get out of here. And we got to go back and circle back to the NFL and their new kickoff format, right? There are some whispers, some talks about them changing the rules up a little bit more in regards to onside kicks and also just the new kickoff format in general. We're going to just touch on it here lastly before we get out of here in our last segment. So join me one more time after this break. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. And for our last segment, I know everybody had to know that I had to go back to one of my favorite topics. Legitimately, I think the new kickoff format and how it all turned out this year, and just back, I guess, last offseason when we were talking about this and how potentially it could change, this was something that I was very antsy about, very anxious about, just kind of thinking that this whole change I really wanted it to happen first, and just how it could change the NFL and, kickoffs and things like that. And I think for the first season, it obviously had a lot of success. I feel like there was a lot of doubts about it, a lot of hesitation about it at first, but I think overall where we stand right now, people are pretty happy with it. I think people are very pleased to where it ended up and how it did change kickoffs, and we got it more involved. We had more returns, obviously, less injuries was obviously a huge part about it, and I think just bringing back more of an importance, giving the special teams more of an impact on these games as well. So overall, big picture, it looked like it all turned out great, but even though it was solid, we got to go back to how can we get better, right? Because the NFL is obviously going to try and make everything better, right? Continuing to improve. So if we go back all the way to December, when NFL Executive Vice President Troy Vincent discussed the NFL reviewing the alternatives for one of the parts of the new kickoff rule being the onside kick rule. And basically, this year, it felt like the onside kick was just taken out of football because, yeah, it was still an option, but it really didn't do much. I'm sure people will pull up options or examples of when it did work, but it didn't hit the same. It didn't hit the same. The onside kick, just taking the surprise element out of it was pretty disappointing. And it just didn't look the same. It didn't have that same feel really this year. So not only back in December when, Troy Vincent, the NFL Executive Vice President, talked about how they could change the onside kick rule, that was one thing that was mentioned about potential changes coming to the kick rule, but also we go to just yesterday where the NFL co-chairman of the NFL Competition Committee, Rich McKay, said that the new kickoff format will have a few more tweaks this offseason. And with that being the case, he said specifically one thing that the NFL is considering is moving the touchback spot back to, or from the 30-yard line, I should say, up to the 35-yard line, like it should have been originally. But obviously they kind of had some wet feet. They got some cold feet. Is it cold feet or wet feet? I think it's cold feet, right? They got some cold feet about it, and they settled on the 30-yard line, basically. Pretty disappointing, pretty, lackluster, because I know I talked about it, during the season and when they came to the ruling, that it should have always been the 35-yard line. They decided to play it safe, and now this offseason, they're talking about moving it to the 35-yard line. Obviously, like, it should have been already in place, but, it is what it is, and they're thinking of doing that to kind of discourage teams from just kicking it into the end zone even more, trying to bring down the number of touchbacks, obviously, and just trying to bring more excitement to the kickoffs, right? Which, again, I could have told you that, and I did come on here and say that they should have done it this way, but now it's coming a year later, and I'm almost certain that all teams are going to vote to kind of get this to move forward, because I think it'll be huge for the NFL in the kickoffs. But not only that, but also he did mention not only moving that spot, but also moving for the kickers where they place the ball. Right now they place the ball at the 35-yard line. Rich McKay talked about them potentially altering it to where the kickers move it back 5 yards and they have to kick it 5 yards further and move it back to the 30-yard line. But Rich McKay did say that they'll likely only do one of these rule changes at first, which is fair, I guess. It is very much like the NFL would do things. So I feel like they're going to just change the touchback spot first, and then they'll maybe get into moving the ball 5 yards back for kickers. But overall, I like how the NFL and Rich McKay and Troy Vincent are looking at the kickoff rule as something that is a work in progress, that they are trying to change it, kind of experiment different things with it. I like that they are trying to make this better. And these two rules, I mean, if I was in charge of it, I would make these two rule changes in effect at the same time. But also, he did acknowledge the fact that you need 24 of 32 owners in favor of changing the rule in order to get it to go through. So I don't know how likely that would be, right? Getting 24 people out of 32 on the same page seems like a very tough thing to do. So, we'll see. We'll see where they go with that. But I do anticipate them changing the touchback. I think that one's got to be a no-brainer, an absolute for them this offseason. But I love that. I think that should already have been in place. And I also don't think it's such a drastic thing, really. Not the touchback rule, but for the kicking rule as well, where the kickers place the ball back, moving it back from the 35-yard line to the 30. I don't think that has a huge impact. We're only talking about 5 yards, and some of these kickers boot it like 15 yards past the end zone. So I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. That's why I feel like they should just have the option to change both of them at the same time. But, I mean, that's where they are right now, some of the latest updates on that. But also, the onside kick rule is another one, where the NFL is still looking at trying to make alterations to it. They are still trying to improve that, obviously, from this year where it wasn't in effect really that much, I believe. And I'm still of the opinion that they should just have it like a 4th and long situation. I think that would be so... In my mind, I think it would be so cool to see that, like a team that's down, whatever, like 5 points or something, and they need like an onside kick to get the ball back and, have another opportunity at it. I think having a 4th and 15 or a 4th and 20 or a 4th and 25 option to where if they convert it, their offense just stays out there on the field and they get the ball back, right? I think that would be so cool for the NFL to do. And actually, the Denver Broncos proposed a 4th and 15 scenario a couple years ago, and obviously it never really gained any traction. And then 2 years ago now, the latest, team to kind of propose something like this was the Eagles, where they proposed a similar 4th and 20 scenario, but again, it really wasn't taken too seriously. But now I think we're at a point where we've seen the onside kick rule kind of be taken out, and I don't think it's so crazy to kind of propose something like that. From one side of it, right? From one side of it, I think it would be awesome, right? You convert like a 4th and 20, 4th and 25. You definitely deserve to keep the ball. And again, it's no guarantee that you score on that play, right? Some people might say that, it's more likely for an offense to convert it than getting an onside kick, right? You're just giving the ball back to the offense. But again, you're only just giving them the ball back, right? And it could be a 4th and 20, 4th and 25 from the 15-yard line. And if you convert it, you're at what? The 30-yard line or the 35 or the 40. I think that's still a decent amount you have to go to. So I don't think it'd be crazy. You still got to go down there and score a touchdown or a field goal or whatever. So I don't think it makes it too in favor of the offense. And also, I think it would be so just unusual, just unexpected, never before seen, that I think would be so much more interesting from one side of it. But I also, as I was writing this, I was thinking about the other side, obviously, and I thought about more controversy for the refs, right? If you get like a PI, if you get like a roughing the passer, you're putting more pressure on them. It opens it up for more conversations about, oh, like the ref ruined this moment by calling this flag, or how do you not call this flag, right? They should have won this game if the ref called the penalty, or if he didn't call the penalty, right? There's going to be a lot more of that, right? In a very crucial portion of the game, you're going to leave it on the ref's hands potentially to call a penalty or not call a penalty. So that would be the negative part of it, right? That would be very unnecessary. We don't need any more controversy, right, with the referees. So I do see that. That's probably a pretty strong point against the 4th and long, now that I think about it. But, I mean, there's also the fact that kicking fans don't want to kind of have the onside kick be taken away from them, because kickers already don't do too much, right, obviously. So taking the onside kick away from them maybe won't be received very well. So you gotta stand up for the kickers too, right? And maybe you, instead of a 4th and 15 or a 4th and 20, if we are still going to include the kickers, maybe make it for them in a way that, all right, instead of an onside kick, maybe we let the kicker try a 60 plus yard field goal outdoors, right, for most of the stadiums. And if they make it, then the team gets the ball back. Maybe something like that would be cool. If you're indoors, you got to hit from 65 yards out. In no elements, nothing like that. If you're in a dome, you got to hit from 65 yards out, and then your team gets the ball back. If we want to keep it in the kicker's, kind of possession, in the kicker's hands, so to say. I think that could be interesting because 60 plus yard field goals are pretty electric as they are, right? If it's a game winner, especially if, all right, like it would be so funny to have a kicker go out there, again, for the notion that kickers don't really do much, right, in the game as much as, other players do, right? Obviously, it'd be so just crazy to think that the whole future, maybe the playoff hopes, maybe everything is riding on the kicker, the guy that maybe doesn't do as much as everybody else, that doesn't do as much as everybody else. The game is in his hands to hit this crazy field goal. It would be electric, so electric if he hits it. And if he doesn't, then everyone's going to be mad that, why is the game on the kicker's hands, right? Why is he the one deciding whether or not they get the ball back or not? But again, I think it would be absolutely electric if he hits it, gets the ball back, everyone's hype on the sidelines that this kicker just hit this crazy field goal. They get the ball back, maybe they go out and win. I think that would be pretty cool and just something of another option potentially for the NFL to consider, right? Again, if you want to keep it in the kicker's hands, right, not take away something else from them. But we'll see where they go from it. Realistically, I think it's pretty hard for me to believe that they're going to change it too much, but I would love it to be one of those two options. I think that would be great, but who knows where they go. I forget when their annual meeting is. I think it's sometime in June or something like that, but we'll keep an eye on that, any developments as we go along. But for right now, that does it for today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media, and also especially on YouTube on the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where You can find more content around this podcast with me as the host, Manny Maradiege, and just more coverage on the NFL, more NFL trade talks, all-season moves, and stuff like that. In saying that, I don't know how much longer I will be doing it. I'm sure this is going to be my last week, unfortunately. But for the time being, more coverage on the NFL, more talks on the NFL, trades, rumors, speculations, draft is coming to you guys through YouTube on both YouTube channels for the time being. So for right now, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you guys again, as far as I know, tomorrow at the same time at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.